Okay, hello everybody. My name is Ben Jott from Social Finance. Sorry we're starting just a couple of moments late. It's really good to have everybody on this webinar. The way that we run webinars is to use slides, which you should be able to see, rather than video conferencing, which we've had problems with in the past. I'm just going to provide a little bit of background to this, which is that we've got here myself from Social Finance, Patrick Shine from Shaftesbury Partnership, Simon Tucker from the Young Foundation. We've also got Anoop from Shaftesbury and Indigo on the line, who's going to contribute to this webinar as well. And we're really putting this on because I think all of us have had people involved in academic health science networks contacting us, asking around social investment, whether that is something which could be helpful in scaling innovation, franchising, which Shaftesbury have done a lot of work in different sectors, and more broadly how this fits into the ecology of promoting and scaling innovation, which is something which the Young Foundation has done, I think, more work on than any other organisation. And so we thought we would put this on at this time just to provide a little bit of background information and an opportunity to ask questions. The way we will run it is that I will spend the first 10 or 15 minutes or so providing some thoughts on social investment. Then Anoop and Patrick will share some of our experience around franchising, and we'll come to Simon for some reflections on how this fits into the kind of innovation landscape more broadly. And then there'll be an opportunity to ask questions. We will keep participants on mute generally, just to avoid kind of background noise and things. We'll seek to come to you if you're asking a question. That doesn't always work, so if it doesn't work, we'll just read out the questions. Do type questions as you're going along. We'll come to them at the end, but that's always a useful prompt as we're going along to respond to some of those questions. Without further ado, I'll just provide a little bit of an introduction on social investment. You should be able to see in front of you just a background slide, he says. Great, there we go. And just a little bit about ourselves. Social Finance is a not-for-profit organisation. Our role is really to try to bring together those who want to invest in social good with social ventures and public sector commissioners who've got an interest in achieving social change, and seeing if we can devise the structures and the capital raising to enable that to happen. Where does the interest in social investment come from? I mean, I think that there's a number of driving forces to this over the last few years. I mean, it's partly that an increasing number of investors want to use their money for a combination of a social impact and a financial return. This is just a graph around young, relatively affluent people looking at how the majority of them would like to get some social or ethical benefits from their investment. And we've also seen, for example, charitable trusts looking to use their endowment for social investment rather than just their grant making. I think the other major driving force around social impact is really a response to the limitations of some traditional forms of both public sector finance and private sector finance. I mean, everybody on the call who has worked in the the NHS will know some of the ways in which particular kind of scaling up of innovation hasn't always been funded and invested in to the extent which would be beneficial. So traditionally, public sector funding has often been kind of quite path dependent in following historical activity. We've seen investment in R&D and innovation, but not always the rollout of that to the same extent. And I think, to be honest, we've also seen quite a lot of variable implementation around some elements of innovation and particular prevention work. And the interest in social investment is whether you can bring investment which is more flexible than the traditional public sector investment, can operate outside traditional budget cycles, brings quite a lot of rigor to a social mission than some of the traditional forms of commercial investment. The landline charities and social enterprises, mutuals, and other social ventures. It's worth saying that although there's a lot of interest in this, the social investment market is very much still in its infancy. I mean, this isn't even scaled correctly. We've got 150 to 200 million pounds of social investment, many of that for a few organisations, and quite a lot of, say, asset-backed building development. But we've certainly seen that there are some opportunities which both commissioners and service providers and investors are interested in. And I would split these down into three ways. The first is around can investment be brought to an organisation to scale a specific intervention. The second is, can it support organisational development in a way which starts to create quite a big system or pathway change. A good example of a project that we're working on, a certain amount of upfront investment in training people, recruiting before the programme is fully operational, and people are moving into a better setting and often a lower cost setting. And by providing the investment for that service up front, it makes it much easier for commissioners to also something where investment up front in the expertise programme. It's been introduced in a number of areas already, usually quite successful, and that's quite attractive to social investors for a social impact bond mechanism. And briefly, it might be worth saying that part of the mission of scaling innovation may well be around of organisations spinning out of the NHS. Much of that has been around service development, but we've also been approached by people developing within their local hospital, for example, and they would want to spread more generally across the country, perhaps in a joint venture. Some of them have got scale to make things change, etc. Social investment can be helpful. And then just we and others have been pioneering the idea of a social impact bond, where the investors bring that initially in reducing reoffending. At the moment we're working with a couple of health economies in Worcestershire, organisation or integrated care organisation, from teams and the like. It's quite a hard, exciting way of cataloging about some of the application investment where there's going to be a financial return of revenue from that investment. There's many good ideas where the revenue here. I think all of us involved in this field are focused on saying where parties, and also where commissioners who, if you have public sector resources available, if you've got the capacity to achieve the same impact within the public sector capital is likely to be. Just to put money into an organisation, they need to understand the control they can have over that organisation if things start to go. Fourthly, social investment is much harder to fund, and that's why we pitched this at scaling up innovation. And finally, for social investors, it will be important that the So innovation has got a strong social and health impact, contract readiness, intermediaries such as ourselves, and a number of other which we can talk about. Just had a question about will the slides be available after the presentation. They certainly will be, and we can send around more information. I think there's a balance between realizing that kind of new organizations in that space understand them, and so that the lesson is to kind of have to bring it together after that.
Thank you, Ben. I'm just trying to get the screen to move here.
I think that's all. We can see it all working fine.
If, you know, the easiest thing is the right thing, and in the whole training and innovation agenda previously, some experience in startups.
Right, thank you, Anoop. My background is largely in finance. One of those, which I'll talk more about, and the second is franchising works. There are other roles, and I think particularly I've been had the experience of helping teams set up new things from scratch, ranging from education. The most powerful models, rapid replicating on franchising in the general commercial sector. It is, of course, an extremely successful franchise, and it captures some key features of a Jakarta, Cairo, New York, or London. The point of the matter is it's consistent. But we'll also have access to lots of many other people who've been in the same boat. And the time wasted, or it feels like it wasted, as you solve problems which seem unique to you until you realize that everybody else has them, is a major cost and risk to a startup. So the trick about franchising is to draw upon the intellectual property that's been developed by the franchisor so that you can cut through all of that hard work and draw upon the learning that's already been acquired. Now, franchising is sometimes called a sector, but really it's a business model. You can find more familiar ones are around retail for the obvious reasons that we're all consumers of retail products. But in fact, there are various from one person profits from the business. Some of those kick back to the franchise. If you think of the brand quality control in marketing and brand management, and if franchisees are not performing, there are a number of very draconian sanctions in place so that one bad apple doesn't spoil the brand and the business across the network. And therefore, to mirror the comments from Ben, it's hard to replicate it. It's also important to have a mentality of quality assurance. Now, this is obviously very built in the health economy, more so perhaps than other lower risk environments. But when you are managing from a distance with a franchisee which is perhaps many miles away, there have to be systems to ensure that that quality assurance takes place. However, the expansion does not have to be financed pure setup and growth. It's distributed. This is a model of philanthropic franchising. People, over 1 million people are involved in donating non-perishable food, which is then boxed up and provided to people in crisis. It's largely driven by volunteers. Churches are this sort of unit which then bring in local community institutions such as schools. And this network is growing very fast. And this is a good example of how the franchising model can lead to rapid scale. In the financial year to the March 2012, the network doubled from 100 to 200, and right now about 3 food banks are set up each month. Moving nearer to the health and social care agenda, Caremark, well-known commercial franchise providing home care. We've been working with this ourselves. It's good for job creation, which is one of my motivations, and there are 68 in the current network, and there are some parallels, I think, between Caremark and the example that Ben gave earlier, although working with a less clinically demanding group. The goal of franchising works is to help people start up their own businesses Now, there are two reasons why unemployed people don't get into franchising. One is they don't know it exists, and so there is an introduction process. But also, unemployed people may not have the money for the license fee. And so we have created a franchising license fund where the fund buys the license in the first place, but allows the entrepreneur to run the business. And then after 2 to 3 years, when the track record is in place, they can then go to their bank and refinance that cost. That was financed by Nesta, Royal Bank of Scotland, local authorities, and the investment is provided by Society Capital. This is an example of how social investment can power both business replication and social impact.
And really what we then it would have with that. So why is this the case? Why is it that we can't take things from one place in Manchester to another place in London? I just want to go back to a common sense check and referencing Google. Now, we all know that Google is a great organization. It does something very interesting. It seems to work. What if I turned around and suddenly asked you to do what Google does? You might say, well, I wouldn't know where to start. And say, okay, well, we'll give you some who can do it. You'd say, well, what about the money? Okay, well, what if we give you the money to do it? You'd still sort of, actually, you'd probably be much more satisfied doing what you're doing. And so why is it that we, in the NHS and the public sector, we then expect when someone tells you, you know, oh, you're not going to do that in hospital, a significant change in the way that things are done. And public sector isn't natural, and therefore you might go and join and work for Google, in which case Google comes with a whole sort of amount of worked examples, process fairly geographically aligned in some places, but you know, the idea of a special than actually an agreement between us both winning out of you doing what we do well, and therefore the franchise method probably or possibly has more potential, although you could well have a provider which just grows and grows. Well, basically, academic health science networks could identify successful teams who are doing the right things and who have the right outcomes, turn them into franchises. I'll go into a little bit more detail on this later, but this is expand them to new trusts. Now, just like any trust in ensuring that there's a success there, and therefore there's some sense in that for an investor, and as Ben mentioned previously, I think the key here is to be able to identify teams of people who are doing something different and which delivers good or better outcome for less. Now, this might be something which, so, you know, some examples that I've come across just in the last few days even are care, a pathology model. And these would all be deliver different outcomes as is. So long as so step 2, finance, then the recipient trust doesn't need to pay a penny up front, because this is something in which the investor could invest. But, of course, there would need to be a penalty that if the trust, there is a deal to be done with the commissioner. Now, firstly to re-procure the service, you know, with the new innovative service, but also to say to the commissioner, look, you know, if we actually do deliver the same service, but you know, we're undercutting, it's cheaper, and we know that it's going to be cheaper because we're replicating something which we've done here, which has been done over here. I think either actually it's just the trick that measures that demand, and the commissioner pays. We could, you know, we'd look for actually a cash reduction. So as cash is saved, cash gets paid out to us. Now, I think those are increasing levels of difficulty, but there are a series of models for a series of different interventions. So there's something really interesting here. And just to give you an example, you could, in quantitative diabetes care, where essentially a team of people pick a certain group of patients and other prevalent factors, then their actual number of foot amputations, toe amputations reduce, and that creates a reduction in demand then for foot and toe amputations. It's an excellent outcome in its own right, but that can be modeled, and certainly that level of demand can then be recompensated by a commissioner. So again, if I could move on, please. The third is, I think, probably the most important, which is help to implement. Those organizations themselves will set up departments which do the training and the processes and the people selection and all of those things to help their next franchise to be successful. Now, in the NHS, it's more likely that there's going to be a gap there, and it's not likely that, in every case, the clinical team who are doing diabetes care, for instance, will be able to do this themselves. So this is a key opportunity for academic health science networks in basically being that broker and then essentially that middleman, who has some capacity around training, transfer of processes and monitoring systems as well, which is critically important. And so if I could move on again. And step 4 is repay the investors. Now again, I must caveat this because there are a range of models by which you might pay the investors. It may be actually release of cash, as I mentioned earlier, but you may actually set up an agreement with the commissioner to say that, look, you pay out based on certain markers being hit. And so you can simplify it or make it complicated depending upon the circumstances and the model. And this is, of course, critical to the whole model because, as Ben said, that there needs to be a revenue stream. And this would be the revenue stream for this model. So again, if I could move on. So finally, what's in it for me? I often find that if people don't answer that question, there's some exciting noises, but nothing ever travels. There has to be something in it for everyone. And if you can look at the innovator, so the person who comes up, for instance, with the diabetes model and makes it work, there is an opportunity here to have an impact across a greater area. Personal fulfillment of making a difference and reducing the number of foot amputations, which across not only Torbay but a wider area. Opportunities for the trust and the team to gain more income. So very, very strong things which relate to the values of the NHS here, I think, which are important. Academic Health Science Network. Well, here I think it's using a model to scale innovation, which is known. Franchising is a known method of doing this. So there's a risk element here which is reduced. There's the potential to use external finance to go further faster. It has to be interesting. And I think the final point is really important because sustainability, where does everything now has to start to stand on its own 2 feet? So here there is a model by which academic health science networks can continue to live beyond government funding and be able to actually grow on their own merit, which I think is really important. Target trusts, basically I think it's almost a no-brainer because this is like a risk-mitigated QUIP plan. You're not having to invest up front, you're reducing the risk of failure, so it's an interesting model. Commissioners, it's lower risk, ways of getting innovative services more rapidly, increased value. Investors, okay, whilst I mentioned the importance of revenue, a clear factor for investors is risk, and we're addressing many of those factors through both using a franchise method and by using a partnership with academic health science networks. So there's a potential here to be a win-win. So I'll hand back on to Patrick just to conclude our part of the presentation.
And I wonder if we might also bring in Simon, who I'm very keen to kind of contribute his thoughts, and then just bring you in at almost at the end about kind of the support that you can offer getting through the application.
I'm conscious we haven't got a huge amount of time, so I'll be quite brief. Chess as well as other areas like local government. We supported the innovation, health and wealth with CCGs in replication of a number of proven models. The development of academic health science networks is a really exciting development. I think for the first time we may well see most innovation functions in the NHS for innovation beyond a single organisation concentrated into one structure, the AHSNs. And that gives us real opportunity to develop really in-depth expertise in how to do this. I think also there's a big opportunity because the NHS traditionally has been quite good at tapping into commercial investment through things like the Small Business Research Initiative, but also the work of the innovation hubs and so on. But actually pretty poor at tapping into field social investment. Given that the ethos of social investment and the interest of the investors is much more closely aligned to the NHS ethos, that seems rather surprising. So there's now a chance to do something about that. The other reason I think there's a big opportunity with social investment is that we looked at some of the most high potential innovations supported through the Regional Innovation Fund. And we calculated the internal rate of return for those investments, including all of the productivity gains that would be achieved by the system. And we came up with some extremely high rates of return, for over 2,000% in some cases. Now, not all of that would be catchable, and that's the theory rather than the practice, but I think there's pretty strong reason to believe that if we get it right, there's quite high potential for social finance, for innovation in the NHS. But just going back a stage, this is about how we support innovation. And there's a wide range of ways in which you might scale innovation within the NHS. At one extreme, you have the spread of an idea or a simple concept, for example, surgical checklists. Then going towards the more formalized, you have things like the spread of a toolkit or a way of working, like the Institute's Wards. And then you have the replication of highly manualized approaches, like nurse-family partnerships. Moving on to that, you have franchising. You have the organic growth of the organization that is responsible for the innovation, whether that's an NHS provider or it's a commercial or third sector provider that grows to deliver through more commissions, a service to a wider range within the NHS. And all of those approaches are valid ways to scale innovation, but for each innovation there will be a most appropriate way to scale. One of the challenges the NHS has is that there's not very much incentive to scale innovations through any of those methods in the NHS, either for the innovator or for the adopter of the innovation. And we've covered some of the reasons for that. What I think is quite attractive about both social impact bonds and franchising is there's probably much more incentive there, at least on the supply side, than many other forms of scaling innovation. Why they're both worth exploring, I think. I think also it's really important that academic health science networks focus on the methods for innovation. If you think about both franchising and social impact bonds, it would be a mistake to think of these as just ways to tap into an extra source of funding. That's really not what they're about. There's two aspects to each of them. One is bringing new money to bear, but the more effort and change from the NHS to achieve. These are not simple things to do. This is not, neither of them are quick fix solutions that you can just grab and influence overnight, had much seriousness of purpose about working out how the social investment, where a lot of thinking has gone in and they've been. The advantage